Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Podcraft. This is the show all about podcasting, helping you to run a successful show. I'm Colin Gray from thepodcasthost.com, joined by Matthew. As always, how are you getting on, Matthew?
Yeah, not too bad, Colin. I've just spent the last minute getting berated by you about various things. The noise on my top, the noise of my chair, the sensitivity of my mic. So I suppose that ties into the topic this week, doesn't it, about podcasting mistakes. Have you ever made any mistakes, Colin?
I mean, letting somebody like you that wears shell suits that swish like crazy
a full
podcast is
pink shell suit.
Probably the biggest mistake I've ever made, I would say.
Yeah.
Do you think that translates to the US? Did the US folk, was shell suits a thing in the 90s in America?
I'm going to say that we discovered over here that they were highly flammable and dangerous before they even made it out there. So
that was it, wasn't it? That was the urban legend. Like, don't go near anything even slightly hot, otherwise you will just like instantly burst into flames. Like shell suits were just it's like coating yourself in petrol. And you might as well do that rather than wear a shell suit. That was the lesson. So yeah, I'm sure our friends over in the US were much smarter than to wear such horribly dangerous and also horribly, maybe not terribly fashionably successful pieces of clothing.
Well put.
So nice. We've got 9 podcasting mistakes to cover today. That'll be good fun. Go through that. We've also got a follow-up on the boom arm that we mentioned last time, actually, the lizard. We've got a new article. Well, an update, an old article, isn't it, Matthew, about boom arms, showing all of our favourites out there in the market. And then a wee discussion at the end around some signs that listeners are actually making more time for podcasts. I think it's a really interesting one in that I feel like there's a lot of podcasters feeling pressure to do more short form, more video, more all the other kinds of things. But this data has been really good actually to show that podcasting, long form, in-depth podcasting really is still in demand, isn't it, Matthew?
Yeah, really encouraging data there. So it'll be interesting to dig into that. This is kind of a preview, if you like, for our discovery survey, which is going to be in the coming week. But really good wee teaser and really good standalone data, to be quite honest with you as well. So
yeah, totally. Cool. All right. Before we jump into the 9 podcasting mistakes and how to fix them, of course, quick mention, our content is always sponsored by the things that we make, one of which is Alitu. So Alitu is our podcast maker app. It does call recording, editing, audio cleanup, and hosting built in as well. The audio editing is text-based and on waveform. It's designed really just to make it as easy as humanly possible to make a podcast. So you can check that out over at alitu.com. That's ALITU.com. All right, Matthew, do you want to take it away with podcasting mistakes? I mean, it's kind of weird you reading this out, having never made a podcast mistake in your life, but
I know, apart from until this morning.
Yeah. Apart from the shell suit. All right, fire in. What we got first?
Yeah, number 1 is prioritising enthusiasm over everyone else. So, I need to be enthusiastic. I need to be motivated to turn up and do what I need to do, because the harsh reality of life in podcasting, Colin, we won't feel that way all the time, will we?
No, not even close. Yeah, I mean, podcasting is great fun, isn't it? Like we do it because we enjoy it for the most part, but there's points where the enthusiasm dies down, the drudgery kicks in. You're like, oh, do I really have to do this week? I think the best of us hit that, don't we? This is why I always really encourage people to do the planning process and spend a lot of time on it. One of which that I always recommend is purpose, isn't it, Matthew? Like figuring out the purpose of your podcast, having a real big goal, an aim, a why behind the podcast. Like, what are some good goals or purposes for a podcast that you've worked with?
Yeah, I mean, you'll typically have somebody come into the table or the mic, as it was, with some sort of goal in mind, won't you? Like growing a business is obviously a very common one. Maybe you're promoting a product or service. Maybe you're an author. It could be raising awareness of a cause, a charity. It could even just be to entertain people, the creative outlet to tell stories. So there's all sorts of reasons people have for podcasting, but I mean, it's really honing in on that as a goal, isn't it? And seeing, they talk about that North Star goal. Like, you think that's kind of relevant here?
Aye, for sure. Yeah, exactly. And if you could put a number next to it, like if it is something around a business or a cause or growing a community or something like that, like if you have a goal to aim for, some kind of number, some kind of metric, that can always make a big difference. And I think as well, knowing the audience makes a big difference there too. Like that's part of the planning process is who is it I'm speaking to? What is it I'm offering them? What problem am I solving for those people? And that often can guide you through as well. So I think often when people are lacking enthusiasm, when your motivation drops around your podcast, it's when you've lost sight of those things. It's when you've lost sight of what is the goal, what is the long-term goal for this show, and who am I speaking to, and why am I speaking to them? Like, what is it I'm offering these people? Like, what is it I'm trying to do for these people that are listening? So I think often, digging back into that can make a big difference.
Yeah, it's, I mean, ultimately, like a lack of enthusiasm or motivation is just your brain's lack of trust over that what you're doing is remotely important or matters. It's
has a point.
Yeah, exactly. So I mean, when you're enthusiastic, when you're motivated, that's brilliant. And of course, embrace that and see what you could get done in these short bursts, but it's not going to be around permanently. So treat it as a bonus rather than something that you need to get things done.
Yeah. Here's an interesting one, number 2. So podcasting mistake number 2, not listening back to your show a few weeks after the episode's published. Do you do this, Matthew?
So I'd love to say I'm deliberate about this. I do it almost by accident. So for example, like maybe I've had a guest on a few months ago and either I'm having them on again or maybe I'm covering a similar topic, or maybe it's just that I remembered they mentioned a specific resource or something to check out, and I'll go back to that episode and listen to it. So it's almost accidental, but it's just amazing. Like when you've got that distance between the recording session and you listen back, you can't remember a lot of the conversation, and you notice the little flaws that I think we're all guilty of sometimes. Like somebody's said something that's really interesting, there's very obviously a point to pick up on and ask more about, and I've just moved on. Or it's just, things like crutch words as well. I notice myself repeating the same word over and over again. So it's a big opportunity missed if you don't try and at least do this now and then, isn't it? But it is difficult.
And it's funny how they change as well, actually, the crutch words. You'll have a crutch word for a few months and then suddenly you pick up another word and then you're saying that every other sentence. And it's a total fashion thing, isn't it? A style thing. Like you pick up these new things and then you move on to another. It's a trend. So yeah, I admit as well, I don't do this that much right now, but I go through seasons of it. Like in the early days of us podcasting, like years and years back, I listened back a lot and I got rid of a lot of my flaws, a lot of my crutches, a lot of my like ums and ahs, stuff like that. But they creep back in. And so I try to listen back take a few weeks every 6 months or so to listen back and see what's crept back in and try and improve. But yeah, I think that works quite nicely. As a new podcaster, definitely listen for, a couple of months and then just come back into it, dip back in when you're, different seasons.
Yeah, I remember when we were down at the event in London, I think we were all going out for lunch, and I think you were speaking to Jan Murray, who's a long-term podcast creator, long-time podcast creator. Long. And I remember her quickly saying, like, sorry, I'm not being rude, I'm listening back to my episode before it goes out. And I remember thinking at the time, that's brilliant, because she's been doing this like such a long time. Like she was, back in Birmingham in 2014 when we were all there. So the fact that, somebody that's been podcasting for that long is still doing something like that, I think speaks volumes. And that's why people get good and they get successful.
Yeah, agreed. And that's why, Jan's been going for ages and she's got a really popular show. And it's almost certainly because of that kind of attention to detail, for sure. Yep. All right. Number 3.
Yeah, not one we struggle with, Colin, expecting perfection quickly or at all. I mean, obviously we're perfect all the time. The listener, not so much. But I was there's a show that I really like and I listen to it every other week, and it's two co-hosts and they're very accomplished, again not unlike ourselves, Colin, but I always find myself thinking, they guys, they've got a great dynamic, they're very polished, they've just got this right balance of delivering the topic and a bit of humour and just personality. And as you do, I binged all of their back catalogue going back like 7 or 8 years. And it was actually quite jarring when I listened to like episode 1, episode 2. I was like, oh, this sounds super rough. You know, they're standing on each other's toes. They're, you know, the content, you could tell there was potential there, but it wasn't brilliant. And you wonder to yourself, like, imagine they'd just given up then, because they would compare themselves then to, you know, somebody who was very good, who'd been doing it for a while. It would have been easy for them to give up, but they didn't. And now they're doing really well. So a long-winded way of saying, like, you won't be perfect straight out the gate, if at all.
No. It's funny, isn't it? Because with podcasting, because we're ostensibly it's just speaking, you know, the job is just to talk, to have a conversation. And so everyone thinks they can do it. And you can't. It's a skill. It's a real skill to practice and figure out like how to have a conversation with somebody on a mic and still make it engaging for the listener, still make content that's actually good for people and help people with whatever you're trying to help them with, or even just entertain. It's hard. So yeah, practice. It's always just practice. All right, number 4, I like this one, which is no specific topic or a vague, fluffy topic. So how many pitches this week, Matthew, have we had through email for people saying, so I'm starting a new podcast and it's going to be about, you know, life, the universe, about everything. And that's how the pitch always starts. Like, just happens all the time, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally. And again, like, We talked in a couple of episodes ago about Mark Maron being the example of, you know, preparing or not preparing for an interview. And then we've got a fellow famous podcaster, Joe Rogan. He just speaks to everyone about anything. And he's just such an outlier because he's world class at this. You know, his guests are generally world class. But your average Joe, you or I, Colin, we can't do a show about anything and everything, can we? It'd just be rotten. Nobody would listen to it.
No. People come for him, and it's the same with like the other sort of a lot of the other big hosts out there that they've all been doing it for years. Like you've got Joe Rogan's been. I saw a stat. He was like one of the earliest podcasters. His show's been around for more than a decade, by miles. I think I can't remember what it is now, but he's been doing this for literally years and years. And so he's simultaneously got really good at it, whether you like him or not. I don't really listen to the show, to be honest, but whether you like him or not, he's got very good at the kind of content he creates, and his name carries so much weight that people will listen to it no matter what he's talking about. That's part of it. So yeah, absolutely. For us, get specific. I mean, I would say even get very so don't even just pick like, I'm going to do health and fitness. Go, right, okay, I'm going to do just fitness. Not even just fitness. I'm going to do fitness for 50-year-olds. Maybe not even that. I'm going to do fitness for 50-year-olds just with dumbbells. And the more specific you can get like that, the better. So yeah, I don't know. Can you go too specific, Matthew?
I suppose eventually, but it depends on again, if your motivation was to build a business and there was only like 6 people in the world interested in your topic, but it was really lucrative, I suppose in theory you could. But yeah, I think going narrow is the right approach.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose this kind of ties in to the next one as well, doesn't it? Like not knowing your target audience, trying to cater to everyone. It's kind of on similar lines, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. This is if you're for everyone, you're really for no one. Like no one's going to care. Everyone's going to be like, meh, he's fine. I don't know if he's really exactly specifically for me. And it goes into that saying as well, like if you're not getting negative reviews, then you're definitely not getting really good positive reviews. Because if no one cares enough to dislike you, then you're probably not being unique enough for being yourself enough. Because if no one's going to like if you're actually just truly yourself, there's definitely going to be some people out there that don't like you for that disagree with your feelings, your culture, your values, your views, all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, that's kind of I think you need to polarize a little bit to actually make some people care.
And just a couple of musings that tie into both the topic point that we've made and the target audience thing is I think some podcasters maybe start and they do have a good idea, but it's a good idea for an episode. Like there's somebody they want to speak to about something, and that's interesting. But that doesn't mean that you've got enough to have an ongoing podcast. You still need to work on that. Maybe there's 2 or 3 people you want to speak to about various topics, but after that, it's almost like, well, where do I go from there? And then you get other examples as well. I mean, for many years I've heard people saying, I'm going to do a podcast with my friend, he's quite funny, and it's like, well, that's good, but like, what are you going to talk about? Don't just like get your friend behind the mic and expect them to be funny. Like, that's not enough. So a lot of podcasts will maybe start on these like foundations of sand, and 6-7 episodes in, just referring back to a few episodes ago, that's when, you know, we maybe see more gaps between publishing the inevitable hiatus announcement, and then that's the end of it. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, the alternative to like I do kind of believe that for some shows, what I just said a minute ago. But the other is that maybe you don't need to get any negative like views or anything, but you're just really specific about exactly the problem you're solving. Again, that's how we treat it here. It's like, we know exactly who the podcaster is because we are podcasters. We know exactly the kinds of problems that people experience, both because we did it, we had those problems, and because people get in touch with us all the time to tell us their problems and ask for solutions. So knowing those problems, knowing those people, knowing the things they struggle with, that's like the most valuable thing. Knowing those pains, because that's the thing that people want to get solutions to. So if you create content that answers those questions, that's going to be the gold that people are looking for. All right. We mentioned this one actually in a recent one, didn't we? Lack of prep, number 6, related to Mark Maron, you mentioned.
There's an old saying, prior preparation prevents piss poor performance. Really good way to check your pop filters working, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I mean, Colin, this is very typical in podcasting as well, isn't it? You know, a couple of guys get together behind the mic and it's like, what are we going to talk about today? And it's just a long meander. And even if they do have a topic in mind, it's kind of hard to get to it because both of them don't really know where to start or that. So, like, how do we go about preparing an episode typically for this show and other shows?
Yeah, for this one, certainly we're like nowadays, it doesn't really matter actually. We've always just created a really big bullet point list of all the topics we want to cover. I'll often add like a fair few sub-bullets as well. So we end up with a page in front of us with maybe, 20, 30 lines on it, 5 to 6 to 7 main topics and maybe 5 or 7 things below that in each topic really to guide us through. And something I do quite often actually with, not necessarily so much with this show, but with other shows that we do is I'll write in questions for the other person. So like my co-host, so the Creator Toolbox, for example, often we talk through kind of longer topics there, related to creator kind of problems, creator questions, all that kind of stuff. And Jacob and I will post questions for each other to ask to kind of break up the conversation a bit. And I find that really useful actually, because it gives you a little prompt and you won't say it necessarily word for word, but it gives you a little prompt that you can ask the other person when there's a pause that really kind of brings them on to their next point and makes it so that it's not just one big monologue. So things like that, like I think bringing in your own style of prep for each individual show is actually really important.
Yeah, I remember like studying radio and you got a bit of experience going into radio studios and watching professional presenters at work, and these are presenters that you would listen to in the car, and it was very natural, very conversational, almost just like a couple of pals, sitting having a chat. And when you went into the studio, it was this weird curtain pulled back moment where you saw that everything was planned down to the very last detail. It was very structured. And I'm not saying that podcasters should do that, obviously. And I thought, the encouraging thing here, Colin, when you talk about this process, it's actually really simple for us to plan it. We're not having an hour-long production meeting. We're not planning it to an inch of its life, so it's still sustainable. So that's not what this is about. It's not over-planning. It's not scripting it word for word. But certainly, you don't want no prep. That's when you're going to come up at the seams.
That's an interesting difference, actually. That's why we end up putting more questions for each other in our other show, the Creator Toolbox, because with this show, you and I know the topics we're talking about pretty much back to front. So we know what questions to ask each other, like to prompt each other to jump in and have a conversation about it, like what listeners will be asking, that kind of stuff. But often with things, with the Creator Toolbox, the idea is that we bring to the show things that we don't necessarily know that much about. So Jacob often brings in tools or techniques or tactics that he's been working on that I don't know that much about. And I'll do the same with him. So it needs a bit more of that prompting. So I think that's a good indication that it does depend a lot on the show. It depends a lot on the topics you cover, the format for that show, what the two hosts, their experience, what they know, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, completely varies. Absolutely.
So number 7 then, overly aggressive sales tactics. Anything we could quickly sell to the listener whilst we're mentioning this?
Well, now that you mention it, we've got... No, I won't do it right now. We're almost the opposite of this, to be honest. As kind of shy, retiring Brits, Scottish people particularly, we're quite bad at sales. But maybe that doesn't apply to everyone. So yeah, what's a good example of this? Is it just trying to do a 5-minute ad read or something like that? Or
Yes, this is such a tricky one, isn't it? Because podcasters, it's great to be able to earn extra income, and especially if you're trying to build a business or you're running a business. So it is constantly this tightrope, isn't it? I don't know that there's a right or wrong way specifically, but we toe that line between, like, we obviously want to mention things that are for sale, and if it's the right products or services, these are relevant to the listener too. But yeah, it's this case of, well, how often, and are you really interrupting content to deliver an ad, or is it coming at what I might consider a more natural and right time? So there's all sorts of things to consider here, isn't there?
Yeah, that's absolutely, yeah. You get those like, so if you sign up for an ad network, often they'll automatically insert, so it's dynamically inserted ads. And they will, they might even cut a sentence in half sometimes. It's like, that's partly the over-aggressive thing, isn't it? But the other part is exactly as you said. Like, I think as long as the products or services or whatever it is you're advertising, whether it's someone you're sponsored by or whether it's a product or a service you do yourself, as long as they're actually really relevant and valuable to the listener, that makes it not aggressive, because you can talk about real benefits. Like we talk about Alitu. So levering it in now, but it's actually serious. Like Alitu is a tool that's useful to just about any podcaster, because it offers call recording, editing, cleanup, and hosting, and all those things podcasters need. So it's less aggressive, it's less onerous for a listener to hear that, because it's something that is definitely in their wheelhouse. Whereas there's loads of memes out there of the common advertisers on podcasters. Mattresses, Matthew.
Yeah, mattresses. Socks as well, food hampers. Exactly. I mean, it's like you're saying. I think the most outrageous example was like, I think it was a podcast for recovering alcoholics, and the podcaster in good faith had signed up to an ad agency. And like you're saying, Colin, mid-sentence, the guy's cut off for like a whiskey ad, and it's like, you couldn't make that up. So again, that's obviously quite an extreme case study, but
so I think the message I would try and drive home is that advertising, sponsorship, again, whether it's external or internal, whether it's your own stuff or somebody else's, it's fine as long as you explain your feelings on it. Like, I think some of the best ads you hear out there are people that say, so this is a product I use and I absolutely love, and so I'm delighted to work with blah, 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 because actually, so we could say this with Rode, couldn't we? Like Rode micro, we're going to talk about boom arms later. I'll mention my Rode PSA-1. I could say, well, I'm delighted to be sponsored by Rode. Rode are paying us some to talk about them for a couple of minutes here, but do you know what? I do it anyway, because actually I really like their products and we use them every single day. So if you can find stuff like that, it just doesn't become aggressive. It becomes actually valuable to the listener, because if it's stuff that you like, no doubt it's something they'd like as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have, not to dwell on this, but I have heard a lot of ads in podcasts in the past that were really educational. Like, maybe I didn't buy that specific product, but I still learned something about that thing or that technique or whatever. So they could be a good part of the content. It's finding that balance.
I love that when podcasts actually bring on somebody from the company. Actually, I've heard that quite often. Like, you'll find somebody from the company, you'll interview them, you'll ask them a couple of questions, so the company gets a good showing. Somebody from the company shows a bit of humanity, personality behind that company, and you do a bit of teaching. You ask them a couple of questions that actually offer some value. Yeah, it's really nice. Right, number 8, long-winded and off-topic introductions. You've never suffered from this, Matthew.
No, I mean, obviously, I think we'll often have 1 to 2 minutes of semi off topic, semi on topic, and whether that's too much, I don't know. It's up to the listener to decide. But yeah, I mean, there are some shows I listen to that I'm happy to skip the first 5 or even 10 minutes because I know that you're just waiting on the actual meat of the conversation. So, again, this is a balancing act, isn't it, Colin? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think this has got a lot better, actually, in recent years. I think like 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was much more common for people to talk for 5 or 10 minutes just about what happened at the weekend before they jump in. And I think there's a few things. I think partly people are wise that even though listeners they're joining a podcast to hear the people and the content, so they do want to hear a bit about you, and a wee bit of the background does make a difference. Like, it gives you some context and it gets you to know the host, and the more you listen to a podcast, the more you're willing to listen to that, because it feels like you're just talking to a friend. But you have to be wary of that putting off new listeners, because new listeners are much less forgiving of 5 minutes of that kind of thing. But I think yeah, 1 to 2 minutes of like just a wee bit of background, presuming also that you make the effort to tease what's coming. So I think that's what we did at the start of this episode. That's what we tend to try and do, is to jump in. There's a wee bit of banter, but quickly say what's coming up on this episode, maybe mention a couple of things more widely that's going on in our lives, and then jump into the topic. Does that make sense to you? Definitely,
yeah. I mean, straight away, you should always be thinking, I mean, it's great that we have our ongoing listeners, but you should always be thinking, this is somebody's very first episode. This is somebody's first experience of this show. You don't want them to feel like they've walked into a private party, like, here's all the in-jokes and that. You had to be with us last episode to get this reference. And if you say up front, okay, today that, this is what we're going to cover, at least they know it's in the pipeline. And if you have more extended anecdotes or personal chat, a funny wee musing from midweek, that is probably better at the end, isn't it? I often refer to it as like the tie loosening at the end. I've covered the content. So there's a couple of wee things to mention before you get wrapped up. So I think even new listeners then, they know that you've delivered, and they're probably quite happy then to hear a wee bit more about that stuff.
You've earned it, haven't you? You've given a bit of value. That's what we often say that about anything that you're asking of the listener. So whether it's listening to your banter or whether it's an advert, a sponsorship, that kind of thing, you want to offer some value first and earn their time, like to make an ask of them. So yeah, definitely. But no, it's definitely worthwhile. Like, it's more so in podcasting than anything else. You listen for the person, the personality. So yeah, don't cut it out entirely, I don't think. Right, last one, number 9, rubbish episode titles and descriptions. So what makes a rubbish episode title, Matthew?
Yeah, like episode 6. I don't know what's in episode 6. Also, like, those like ongoing copy and paste show notes that you'll see, like, on this episode, the guys chat about, and it's just a bit like, you could do a wee bit more there to tempt me to listen. But I mean, the episode titles are the big one, because they're really what you're paying attention to. Aside from the old episode 1 format, are any other examples, Colin, of bad episode titles?
Yeah, just Matthew McLean. That's it. Somebody's interviewed you.
It's a great episode title.
Someone's interviewed you and it's just your name on it. And that happens so often. Even when it is expanded a bit and it's like Matthew McLean talks about life, the universe and everything. And we're like, you've lost me by Matthew Mc. Oh, who's that? Don't know. No idea. Who cares? Yeah. I think episode titles I'll maintain to the end of podcasting. It just needs to be about benefit. You need to put the benefit to the listener right up front. It needs to be straight away. What are they going to get from listening to this episode? So yeah, episode numbers, names, anything like that can just go by the wayside. What descriptions? I'm less prescriptive on descriptions. What do you think makes a good description?
It could even be a couple of sentences, almost that logline approach. Like, an episode about this covering this and 3 bullet point follow-up resources. Like, I don't think it... Yeah, you're right, though. Like, I don't know that I've ever, or I could think of an example where I've found a good episode title, a compelling episode title, and then read the show notes or even looked at the show notes and thought, no, this isn't for me. Like, has that ever happened to you?
No, you're probably right, actually. Yeah, if the episode title's doing its job, I'll just listen. It'll tell me enough. And the only time I do look at descriptions these days probably is if it's a show I know quite well and the episode title hasn't grabbed me enough, or it doesn't tell me quite enough, and I'll think, oh, I'm swithering, and I'll just I'll look at the description. But if it's a show I don't know that well, I won't even look at all. Yeah.
So it's almost like that fallback, isn't it? Like maybe you're not very good at naming your episodes, but for some reason you write the best show notes ever. You could still maybe capture those lessons, but that's you get in touch.
Yeah, or potentially it's like if it's a topic that I know a bit about anyway, or I've heard a bit about from elsewhere, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what detail they're covering. Yeah, something like that. But I'm not sure. I think even with descriptions, I think the same rule applies though. Anyway, is it's not. On this episode, Colin and Matthew are sitting down to talk about, it's just straight away like, today, learn this, and this. Get straight into it. Yeah. I think leave the personality for the podcast.
That briefly leads me to a completely off-topic anecdote, which is super pertinent. Just where you're saying that, like, wordy approach. I was trying to sell some old stuff, some of Brooke's old stuff on Gumtree, and it's got this thing where it's like, in the description, you must write like 15 words. So you're really wordy, like, this buggy with 4 wheels, and like it's like writing an essay at school and trying to meet the word count. Anyway, I thought that was funny at the time. Like it's asking you to be more verbose. So
you do not need that many words, yeah.
The photo and the title are doing its job, but never mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. All right. Right, that's our 9 then. Hopefully you have learned something from those 9. That you can apply to your own podcasting. Do you know what I'd love to know though? I'm going to mention our community. So we've set up a community space over on Circle. You can find it over at thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community. And this is for listeners of the show, so that we can interact with you. We can tell you about new episodes. You can tell us questions for the show. You can give us feedback on the show, all of that kind of stuff. We'd love to build up a little community of listeners there so that we can, you guys can meet each other as well, and we can get lots of feedback for the show. So the question for this week is, what mistakes have you made in your podcast? So have you made any of these mistakes, or are there other mistakes entirely that you've made on your podcast? So we'd love to hear that feedback. Pop over to thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community, join up, and you can post in there. There'll be a post there ready and willing. I'll write that question in for you, so you can post it in the comments, and we'll read them out on a future episode if we get any good ones as well. Sound good, Matthew?
Sounds excellent.
All righty. Should we dig into boom arms then? A wee mention of some boom arms.
This is such an ongoing narrative now, isn't it? It's like the third week running, I'm talking about boom arms, which I've just discovered apparently. But no, we updated our best boom arms roundup, and again, no coincidence that's because I got myself a really good boom arm, the Lizard, the IX Tech Lizard, and I thought, well, let's get that into the roundup. It's a very short roundup. Basically a super budget option. The Lizard kind of slots nicely in the middle, and then one of your very fancy Rode PSA 1s at the top, Colin.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, the PSA 1 or the PSA 1 Plus. I think they're both the same. There's no real there's a few little cosmetic differences, and supposedly they have a shock mount, I believe, built into the PSA 1 Plus.
It's just more like rubber coating and stuff here and there.
Is that what it is?
If you were, for some reason, doing the river dance on the table, maybe the audio would be better. But again, if that's you, get in touch.
Yeah, not me. I had to put a shock mount on it anyway. One interesting thing around this, I think, is the budget one, because the PSA one, the Rode ones, are pretty expensive. They're 80, 90 quid, especially if you need to buy two, for example, for a studio, adds up a bit. We, in the early days, bought a few of those Newer. So we've mentioned the Newer NW35 in the review. And do you remember some of the cheapy ones we bought back in the day, Matthew? Like 10, 15 quid for a boom arm.
Yeah.
What's your memory of those?
Yeah, I mean, well, firstly, like the ones you're talking about, is it newer or newer or newer? Like I've never heard it said
newer,
aloud.
But
Newer.
I don't know if that's, yeah.
So for the listeners' benefit, Colin doesn't mean they're literally newer. He means that's the name, the brand name. But these are like 20 quid. You get a shock mount and a pop filter with them. And yeah, like you're saying, Colin, we bought a bunch of different ones for in that price range, and these stood out so well because they just didn't fall apart. Whereas the other ones, you remember, you'd put a mic on it and you'd be recording, and you would realise that you're getting lower and lower. It would just droop. Yeah. So you're like constantly tightening them up. The things were just threading, and they were just they weren't worth even that small amount of money.
Nothing worse than boom droop.
Yeah, boom droop.
Yeah, no, it was, genuinely the newer ones, NEEWER, that's spelt. So much better. The big difference I found, actually, apart from the boom droop and the falling apart, was it's the mount. So the way that the boom goes into the mount, like one of the big benefits of boom arms is that you can swivel them to the side. You can go sideways as well as up and down with the arm. But some of the cheaper ones, you had to screw in, like it wasn't a tight fitting, and therefore you had to screw it in to make it actually stand up, and therefore you couldn't turn it, and they were useless. So you'd unscrew it and turn it, but the thing just flaps all over the place, and they were useless. So yeah, the Newer was the only one that we found that was worth using under 20 quid. So.
Yeah, it was like, I know what you're meaning. It was like a vertical clamp almost, like it separated, and you got the fitting in it and tightened it. But yeah, like super impractical. And just, you could see with something like that, this isn't going to last long. Like I think I could tighten and untighten this maybe 4 times before it falls apart. So
that's it. Yeah, totally, they're crap. All right. So we've got a last one around 3 signs that listeners are making more time for podcasts, which is really interesting data, actually. So we'll dig into that. Shouldn't take us too long. But just before I jump into that, just a quick mention for Alitu again. As always, I mention our content is sponsored by the products we make. Alitu is one of them. It's our podcast maker app. Maybe specifically this time around, I'll mention the editing. So if you don't know, we have text-based editing in there as well as waveform-based editing. So one of the benefits, I think, of Alitu, the way it stands out, is that you can do your detailed editing with the waveform. So your traditional way, you can drag out the words, you can adjust the edges, you can make your cuts perfect, but you can also do that kind of top-level editing with text. So you can make a transcript, you can go through the transcript, you can delete entire sentences, entire paragraphs, and you can really easily navigate around your podcast, find those mistakes. Something I do is I say the words edit point whenever we make a mistake, which is never, Matthew, is it?
Never, ever.
Never. But when I do make a mistake I want to edit, I'll say the words edit point, and then in the transcript, I can search the words edit point. I can find it, and I can really easily find the points where I want to actually cut something out, so I don't have to listen through the whole episode, as we mentioned earlier. Saves time on editing. But then I can also go in and edit the detail, so I can actually adjust the edges with the waveform editor really simply. So if you think that sounds good, if it might suit, pop over to alitu.com. That's ALITU.com, and you can get a 7-day free trial to check it out. All right, Matthew, 3 signs listeners are making more time. What we got in here?
Yeah, it sounds like we're going to get a load more listeners, doesn't it? So, this is the first sort of teaser, the first piece of content that we've created around our podcast discovery in 2024 survey. So Katie's put this one together with the initial data, starting out with preference for episode length. You know, when a listener is looking for a new show and they see the episode lengths, what are their kind of initial thoughts here? So we have some data. The question was, what is your preference when it comes to podcast episode length? 15% prefer it if the episodes are longer, over an hour. 32% don't have an episode length preference, and 53% prefer it if the episodes are within that 15-minute to 1 hour range. Colin, if your maths are on point, what percentage preferred it if the episodes were less than 15 minutes?
Zero.
That's correct.
Nada.
So obviously that doesn't mean you can't have a hugely successful short form show. There are loads of examples of these podcasts, but it maybe shows a mindset of what a podcast listener is looking for when they open up that app, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think this is really promising, isn't it? Because there's a narrative that you have to get shorter, more concise, more brief, like short form content particularly, obviously, but even YouTube videos. There's a lot of chat around like what's the ideal length and stuff like that. And often it's a whole lot shorter than podcast episodes. So it's just great to see that people are confirming that they actually like long form content, particularly in podcasting. They'll listen to a podcast that's longer than an hour. That's 15% of people will actually particularly graduate towards podcasts that are more than an hour. But then those 53% definitely want more than 15 minutes. And I've heard a lot of people talk about like doing 10 to 15 minute podcast episodes, like keep them quite short. But maybe that's not the way to go. Maybe they do want more of you, more of the personality behind it as well. And if they want that really concise learning content, they'll go to like a blog or a YouTube channel, which you can create, alongside your podcast, but they are looking for that long form version too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this isn't like permission to pad out content, is it? Like if you've got 10, 15 minutes of great content, you don't want to go over an hour because that'll please 15% of people. But at the same time, it's encouraging that, if Colin, I'm sure we could solve string theory if it's a problem that needs solved. We don't have to get that wrapped up in 10 minutes. We could take like an hour and a half to put it all to rights.
It's an encouragement to go deep, basically, to go deep and really investigate something and offer value every minute, like you say, but like you can go deep and long, and yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Okay. And also the back catalogue as well. That's the second bit of data in here, isn't it? Is the question we asked was, how does a podcast back catalogue affect your decision to listen to a new show? We had 29% of people prefer a podcast to have a big back catalogue of episodes. So coming on for a third of people there. 13% of people prefer a podcast to have at least some episodes, so a small amount of episodes that they can easily catch up on. Only 3% don't listen to the back catalogue at all. And then 55% of people saying the back catalogue doesn't affect their decision to listen. So that's really cool, isn't it? It's people are going right into the back catalogue. Last time we looked at this, 64% of people said they didn't care about the back catalogue. So that's a whole nother, 9% of people are actually caring about the back catalogue now compared to before. So showing that people are more graduating towards that. Yeah. What do you think's driving that, Matthew?
It's just, this is something I've always maintained that is a big strength of podcasting in a way that people actually convert new listeners to fans is a back catalogue. It's just such a common path for a listener, isn't it? You find a show, you try an episode out, you like it, you see they've published 70 other episodes, and you go back and listen to them all. Like I've done that so many times, and that's really what makes you a fan of the show. It's not waiting on the next episode, although that is good. It's doing the binge. And I just love how, as much as 55% here have talked about the fact that the back catalogue doesn't affect their decision to listen, that's not them saying they don't listen to it. Like only 3% of people have said that. So it is really cool because I'm not saying that, somebody won't find a YouTube channel and look at all the previous videos. That probably does happen. Finding a blog, reading all the previously published articles probably does happen. But I think in podcasting, it's the rule rather than the exception for people to go through and just check out what you've done before.
Yeah, definitely. The encouragement I would take from this is that it shows that the further you go, the longer you spend on podcasting, the more consistent you are and build up that back catalogue, the more power it has. Like the more power it has to encourage people to binge, to become big fans of your show. Keep it going. It shows the kind of escalating power of the length of time you spend on your show. What about number 3, Matthew? The last one here. Listeners give new shows more time?
Yeah, more encouraging data. This is just super optimistic. So, the question was, when listening to a new podcast, how long do you give it to hook you in before you give up on it? And we've compared the stats with the last time we ran this report back in 2020. So 2024 stats, up to 15 minutes came top at 40%. So people giving you a good quarter of an hour there to give them something. One full episode, 29%, and 5 minutes or less, 17%. 11%, they're 2 full episodes as well. That's pretty generous, isn't it, when you think about it? So
definitely.
How does that compare, Colin, to 2020? Any major jumps there?
Yeah, such a difference, isn't it? Like the smallest one was 1 minute or less. And actually 2% of people in 2020 said that they would only give a podcast 1 minute, whereas 0% of people in 2024 said that. Then the next one up was 5 minutes or less. 17% this year, like you said, but 27% in 2020, 4 years ago. Another 10% of people would only give it 5 minutes. So that's 10% of people now giving the episodes longer. And in 15 minutes, so up to 15 minutes, 40%, way bigger than 29% in 2020. So an 11% jump there in people that have increased to 15 minutes. So yeah, it's great. I'm not sure where. Couldn't even begin to guess what's driving that. Is that just people being more knowledgeable about, the type of content that podcasting is, as in it's long form content. It takes people a while to get in. So the more mainstream podcasting becomes, the more experienced listeners become, the more they realize that that's what it takes to actually get into a podcast and trust it can get there. Is that the case, do you think?
Yeah, it is really hard to put your finger on, isn't it? I mean, the one elephant in the room is that podcasting was mental in 2020. Everything in the world was mental in 2020. But, that is the 1 year that all sorts of stats were just wild. Like, probably the most people that ever had a podcast had it at that point. So I wonder if there's some of that, and maybe now things have settled down. The people that liked podcasting have stuck with it, and they just have, like you're saying, Colin, that they're really familiar with how this medium works, and that this is long form, and that they're not going to get that value in less than a minute, or even less than 5 minutes. So it's great to see. It's great. Very encouraging, like I'm saying, to see that we're getting this patience. Because again, we did a whole episode, didn't we, on the long form, short form content thing, and this suggestion that get your video, like get the meat there like within 10 seconds and that. So it's good to see that there's still a real appetite for this long form content.
Yeah, people give it a chance. They give it a chance rather than just like writing it off within the first minute. It's great. Yeah. Okay, cool. So that's just one part of the data that came out of the discoverability survey. So we'll talk about more of that in future episodes, won't we, Matthew? Loads of lessons in there, I think, around how to help people find your show, how people do look for shows so that you know where to advertise your own, all that stuff. So all those benefits. All right, Matthew, that do it for another episode?
Sure. Well, yeah, I'll put links in the show notes to everything mentioned today, and I make sure you get signed up to the Podcraft Perspectives newsletter as well, so that you hear about that discovery survey report when it comes out.
Yeah, perfect. And the community too. We'd love to, that's the main call to action. We'd love to see you in the community, thepodcasthost.com/podcraft community. Go over there and let us know what mistakes have you made in your podcast. And yeah, we'd love to mention a few of them on a future episode. All right. Cheers, Matthew.
Thank you.
I'll speak to you next week. And thank you out there for listening as well. Hope you gave you some tips to help your podcast become more successful. We'll talk to you next week. Speak to you then.